Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We move from that wonderful soothing music to a hot topic. We're going to continue discussing intercession and mediation and the objection to the idea that there should be a need for any middleman for Jewish people. Tonight, we're going to spend a little time looking at Jewish thought in the Hebrew Scriptures. And then the question is the possibility of a final program that deals with theophanies and the way they're dealt with in the Bible as actual mediation on God's part. So in order to go ahead and do that, I need to switch you over to the PowerPoint. So I'm going to do a screen share here and put that up there. Get started. And there you go. There is Leah. Leah's kind of new. We had a Rebecca. We've had a Sarah. The least we could do is have a Leah as we talk about the matriarchs of Israel. And so, of course, Leah is going to be very interested in this topic and have some very good questions. I hope you guys will interact too. I also trust that there'll be people going in and out. Now, tonight we're streaming both to Facebook and Periscope to get things up and running there. It's been a little while since I've done that. And so that's up there. I do want to quickly switch from Leah for just a second. Here, just to let you know about Thursday. So if you're tuning in and you're a regular person who tunes in, we are going to try a reflections on the Passover Seder tomorrow with 2 cameras. That's right. I found an app that allows my phone to be a camera. So we're going to have to try 1 camera on the Seder plate and 1 camera on me. And so I will move to manipulate the Seder plate. That's a special event, same time tomorrow. So if you want to see kind of a Messiah in the Passover, reflections on Passover, that is tomorrow's broadcast. The prayer warriors can be praying that everything goes right. We're going to be pulling some special high speed with the 2 cameras. The phone is 1 camera, but that is up and coming. Let's get back to Leah. If you've never tuned in before, this is a good night to tune in. And tomorrow night is a good night to tune in. So we're back with Leah here. It is great to have a shout out to Elizabeth from down under. And of course, Brother Steve's here. And some people just be getting it replay, and that's fine too. But she's got her cup of coffee. Here in Arizona, it is 6 o'clock. So I am not doing a cup of coffee. Actually, just to let you kind of in, because I like to just have some fun with this. I got to get over here, but let me remove her for just a second more. I've got my green smoothie. So she's got her coffee, and she's probably got the better of the deal, right? Let's keep moving along here. There we go. Now we have our detractor's corner. We don't even need to say who the detractor is, okay? But you need to hear him. Not because you want to hear him, but because we want to be honest. These are not my words. These are his words. There were a lot of clips that were really useful from this particular rant. And so I'm going to let you listen. It's a short clip, but I am not misquoting him. I'm not misrepresenting the Jewish objection. I am letting him speak himself so that you can hear it right from the horse's mouth.
He's so perfect. You're such a sinner. You need a mediator in between. You can't talk to Hashem. Who was Abraham talking to, himself?
Okay, now, a little bit goes a long way with this particular detractor, so I'm going to remove him. Good to see Jesse here. And I'm going to go ahead and move on in the PowerPoint. But that was our detractor. We know who that is. I want you to hear the sort of venom in there. There's a lot of emotion with this Jewish objection. And of course, in particular with this particular detractor who really doesn't want to give any sort of ground to what we would call a biblical New Testament faith. And so you could kind of hear, so who was Abraham talking to? Well, let's talk about whether Jewish thought allows for intercession and mediation. Now, this is really kind of fun. This is a picture of the Ochel, where Rabbi Menachem Schneerson was laid to rest next to his father-in-law. Now, Rabbi Schneerson was a leader in the Hasidic community, the Lubavitch. There are different sects of Hasidic. And, of course, the word Ochel comes from tent, but you can see it's not your average tent, right? And I put this up here because people go to visit the Ochel, and we want to talk about what a tzaddik is, which is what Rabbi Schneerson would be known as, and what an Ochel is, and why people are going to see the place where Rabbi Schneerson is laid to rest. Now, I want to let you know that these Hasidic Jews are Orthodox Jews. They're considered Orthodox Jews by other Jews. In fact, they're considered probably the most doctrinally, the best keepers of the Jewish traditions that there are. And so I'm not even picking, a group that does not observe Jewish thought here at all. And so this is the Ochel. Brooklyn is the epicenter for the Lubavitch Hasidic. Okay. Now, this really gets interesting. Jewish thought on this gets really kind of murky. Now, a lot of the sources that I read are very quick to point out that we don't pray to men, and men aren't intermediaries. But on the other hand, in the same articles, they demonstrate that mediation and intercession are perfectly acceptable. So let's just look at one of those. In fact, the Zohar states that if it were not for the intercession of the souls who reside in the afterworld, our world would not endure for a moment. So what this book, the Zohar, is saying, which is a mystic commentary on the Pentateuch, is that there is constant intercession by those who've gone before God on the behalf of the world, and if there was not, our world wouldn't continue to exist. So what's wrong? Why do we need these guys to intercede for us according to the Zohar? I mean, there's this absolute no middleman, right? Well, middleman, it looks like there are a lot of middle people here if I'm following this thought. And the Zohar contains material that's considered perfectly acceptable in Jewish thought. So the idea that Jewish thought has no mediation or intercession at all built into it is an oversimplification and a misrepresentation. Okay? There are the two streams here that are very much a part of Jewish thought. Now, I mentioned a tzaddik. Okay? Rabbi Schneerson would be considered a tzaddik. And I want to let you know what a tzaddik is in Jewish thought. Now, let me tell you what a tzaddik is as far as Hebrew. The word tzaddik is the word we get saint from. If you read your Old Testament and you pull out an English version, you're going to see the word saint. In fact, you're going to see the saints mentioned in your Old Testament. This is from the word tzaddik. It's the idea of a righteous one. And so that's why you see saints there. Now, the New Testament translates saint in terms of the word, more in terms of hagios. So different words are used, but that's why you see saint in your Old Testament. Now, the Jewish community, saint takes on even more of a sort of meaning. So understand that Rabbi Schneerson is considered a tzaddik, which is the word we get saint from. And this is really ironic in light of Catholicism. Okay, let me talk a little bit about what a saint is. This is taken from the Chabad Lubavitch website. I'm not making up anything. I went to their sources. Jewish tzaddik, it was accessed on the 29th. The URL is right there. It's in their library. You could copy and paste it. I don't think I can from here, so I might throw that in later, but here's the whole thing. The personality of a tzaddik is a celebrated, manufactured, original specification. So everything in him, just as his creator was meant it should be. He desires what his creator desires. A tzaddik embodies the creator's primal conception of a human being. In other words, he's everything that a human being should be. Now, to be everything a human being should be, he's still a human being. So they're just pointing out that Rabbi Schneerson had good days and bad days and felt stuff, all very nice and very good. He had to sleep. He's a creature. Okay, he has limitedness, time for leisure. Those are all creaturely things. Okay. But what's important about this, okay, to the tzaddik, everything exists as a means of connecting with the infinite God. Now, pay attention to the word connecting. It's not about praying. For the Lubavitch Orthodox Jew, it's about kesher. It's about connecting. We'd say relationship. Okay? But it's not simply about praying. Now, there are problems already biblically with what Schneerson said, but there's this chochel, and people are visiting it because there's this tzaddik laid to rest there. And the Zohar itself says that there seems to be allowance for intercession. And by the way, on the part of people, no less. Okay? Now, let's look at this, okay? I always was under. Now, this is a question that was asked on the Lubavitcher website. This is a question that was asked on Chabad, this ultra-Jewish website. Someone said, I've always under the impression that Judaism firmly believed that there was no intermediaries between God and man, and to pray to the deceased was blasphemous and outlawed by the Bible. So if so, why is it permissible to ask the Rebbe to intercede on one's half at the kochel? Now, understand what this person's asking. I showed you the kochel. People are going there and asking this dead Rebbe, who's a tzaddik, to intercede with God on their behalf. And this individual is saying, well, my understanding of Judaism, and this is the understanding that Tovia Singer is pressing here, was that there are no intermediaries. So why would we go and ask Rabbi Lubavitch there, Schneerson, to intercede on our behalf? Now, this is the website. This is the article. Okay. Now, what do people go and do? Well, many people come to the Ochel with requests and advice. Some are at the crossroads. Others have major decisions to make. Some simply want assurance that their prayers will be heard in heaven and will be answered. So who are you going to get that assurance there? You're going to the Rebbe. The Rebbe will find a way to answer you. He does, for it is no surprise. The guidance does come. The Zohar teaches the tzaddik who is passed on is present even more than during his lifetime. So the first part of the answer to this is, yes, the Rebbe in the Orthodox Lubavitcher community actually acts as an intermediary of sorts, even after he's dead. Well, how do you justify this? What? Abraham talked to God himself, obviously. By the way, Abraham had a covenant with God, so he could talk to God that way. I mean, let's not make a mistake here. It's not just any old guy off the street. Okay? Now, this is the Lubavitch website. We're going to go to this section here. But I love this. They're big on, here's this, no mediators at all, right? No mediators ever of any kind in Jewish thought. The Hasidic Chabad says, we see the Jewish people ask Moses to intercede many times, and he accepted their request. Wait a minute now. Our detractor here is saying no mediators in Jewish thought at all. Now, there's a strain of Jewish thinking like that, but there's another strain of Jewish thinking that he's not even talking about with the Rebbe. And you go to the Orthodox Lubavitch website where the Hasidics are, right? And what do they say? They say, well, Moses was asked to intercede, to mediate between God and Israel several times. He accepted their request. If he hadn't, we wouldn't be here. Oh, wait a minute. What are we hearing here? If Moses hadn't interceded and acted as a mediator between Israel and God, we, the Jewish people, wouldn't even be here. But there are no mediators or mediators or intermediaries between God and Israel, right? Well, according to them, if Moses hadn't been a mediator or an intermediary between God and them, a mediator, Jewish people wouldn't even be here. And this is the website. The Talmud, Baba Bartra, 116 tells us that if there's someone ill in your house, what are you supposed to do? Go to the wise men of the city and ask that he should pray for him. So you're asking the wise man of the city to intercede, act as an intermediary between your sick person in your house and God. Of course, the person also needs to pray for himself, and his family should as well. Okay, so any Jew who knows another Jew should pray for him, but you need to go to that wise man as well. Now, this particular website run by Orthodox Jews has said two things. One, Moses acted as an intermediary between the Jewish people and God, and if he hadn't, we wouldn't be here. Now, I'm going to go to the Bible, but I want you to see that there's a strain of thought here where intermediation is perfectly acceptable in Jewish thought, just as there's a strain of thought that doesn't like it. Now, remember that some of the Talmud and later Jewish writings were written as polemics against our New Testament faith. So, of course, there was some distancing there. But the idea that Judaism allows for no intercession or mediation at all between man and God does not seem to fit having a giant building that people go to go ahead and ask Rabbi Schneerson to intercede for them. So the detractor from this particular position really needs to go talk to the Lubavitch about their shockingly un-Jewish and pagan-like behavior, if they're going to be honest about this. But now let's look at mediation and intercession. I did a fun thing. In the description of this video, I give credit to a website that has all sorts of neat little Lord of the Rings clips. I love Lord of the Rings clips. It's amazing how much allegory that J.R. Tolkien hated allegory, but it's amazed how much slipped out. Special hi to Slam RN. I'm glad you were able to make it. I don't mind people coming in late. It is great to have a Goy for Jesus with us. I almost don't want to put that title up there because it sounds like I'm saying it's great to have Gentiles listening. It is great to have Jeff listening. Lindsay, it is always good to have you here. You are in time. Get your popcorn. This is a short little Lord of the Rings clip. It's there because I want to give you a picture. Mediation and intercession were so on the mind of J.R.R. Tolkien, given his background, that it actually slips into Lord of the Rings. And what I've demonstrated here is that really Judaism does have a concept of intercession and mediation within its streams of thought. And that the pushback of the detractors is a pushback against giving credit for very Jewish ideas being in Christianity. And so Slam's got her popcorn. That is too cool. I love the emoticons. And I'm going to start this thing up. I hope you guys can hear this okay. Oh, no, I know what I did, guys. Well, okay, the sound isn't playing. Let me go back for just a second here because I see what happened. It's only playing the screen. So what I'm going to do is remove this, and I'm going to screen share the video file directly from my thing. Okay, here we go.
If you want him, come and claim him. Nino Hithaglia Last of Bethlehem. Rimonin Ruinan Danin Hulaya. Don't give in. Not now. What grace is given me. Let it pass to him. Let him be spared. Save him.
Last with me.
Okay, anything over about 2 minutes is going to get me in trouble. So, but that's a clip I really love. And so what you're seeing here is she's acting as a mediator, essentially. She's acting the way a tzaddik in an Orthodox Lubavitch community would act. I mean, don't kid yourself with the idea that Judaism doesn't have any of these ideas. And in the Second Temple period, they were probably even more prevalent. So the idea that Judaism allows for no mediation and no intermediary in the sense of intercession is an oversimplification at best and does not represent things very effectively at all. And so I'm going to go back to sharing the screens here. Put us here, share this, put me back up here. We need to move on. Okay. This is an oversimplification. There are two strains in Jewish thought. There were concerns over deifying non-deities. And then there were polemics against the Christians, and so you do see some pushback, but you also see this being in Jewish thought. But what about the Jewish scriptures? Now, we're going to take some of this tonight, but I really want to look at the theophanies as intermediation between God and man, and then even look at some of the stuff that is Kabbalistic. Now, I'm not endorsing the Kabbalah. What I'm saying is some of these thinkings that the Kabbalah has are a part of Jewish thinking. Okay. Now I'm looking at Exodus 32, 8 through 14, which is, by the way, cited by the very Orthodox Jews as being evidence. So let's just look at this. This is Exodus 28. Now this is after the golden calf incident. The golden calf has been made. And I want you to watch this. They have turned quickly out of the way, which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molten calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it, saying, "This is your God that brought you out of the land of Egypt." And the Lord said to Moses, "I have seen these people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And I will make you a great nation. Then Moses pleaded with God, his God, and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn not against... Oh, sorry. Why does your wrath burn not against your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, he brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath and relent from the harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, your servants, to whom you swore your own self and said, I will multiply your descendants as the stars in the heaven, and all the land that I have spoken I will give to their descendants, and they shall inherit it. And the Lord relented from the harm which he would do to the people. Now, I want you to look at this on two levels. There's at least two levels going on here. By the way, if we do a further thing, I want to talk a little bit about the merits of the fathers as a way by which grace could be mediated, actually, and understand this a little better. First of all, we have Moses interceding. Now, our detractor went, God is so holy and you're such a sinner, you can't just approach God. Well, let's look at what's going on here. The Lord does not ask the children of Israel to go ahead and confess their sin and go directly into his presence, does he? He's going to kill them. Who exactly is talking to God right now? Who is mediating and putting himself on the line right now? Moses. Moses is acting as an intermediary between God in his wrath and the children of Israel. Don't tell me the Torah. I mean, what's going on here? Let's look at the actual passage. This is Torah. This is Exodus. This is Moses. In fact, the quote that occurs in this section by a Jewish polemist indicates that Christians uniquely and biblically paint God as some angry man. Rather, we should look at God as a placid, easygoing deity who does not get angry. Really? I mean, that's sort of the picture he gives. That God is this angry man in the sky and he would never be angry with anybody. Well, we just looked at this and God's pretty angry. In fact, the threat here is that he'll destroy the entire nation. God isn't just a placid deity, and his comment about God is so holy and we're so sinful actually is an accurate picture of what the Bible says. He's actually misrepresenting the Torah. Now let's look at the beginning of this passage. What's God's assessment of Israel in this passage? They're a stiff-necked people. They're not obedient. They are sinners. Absolutely sinners. They're a stiff-necked people. That's the same as saying you're so sinful. Let's be real clear about that. God is literally threatening to obliterate that. Okay? Wow. You just have to look what's up there. I mean, this is not any view of God that looks at God's holiness as sentimentality is misrepresenting the God of Torah. By the way, I didn't say any view of God that looks at God as holy and not loving, did I? Okay, I'm not picking one attribute over another. What we're talking about is holy love as opposed to sentimentality. Sentimentality lets someone do what they want. A right love does not. God is rightly angry with them in the same way that a man would be angry if his wife had an affair, or if a husband husband would be angry if his wife had an affair, or a wife would be angry if her husband had an affair. Okay. Now, not quite as crude as that, but understand that those feelings in us are a reflection of the type of zealous love that God has perfectly. We have it imperfectly and sinfully. He has it to the right degree in the right way. It's a reflection, not an exact copy. And so this picture of God as this placid deity is de-emphasizing the importance of God's holiness. Okay. Okay. Slam asked a question here. She used a term that might have to be explained. So she used the term impassable. That doesn't mean impossible. All right. What impassable means is that the Westminster Confession of Faith says that God is without emotion, which to me makes John 3:16 not make a lot of sense. For God so loved the world, but he's incapable of emotion. So what then is love? Has no emotional sort of expression? No, I do not at all buy the Westminster Faith's appraisal of God as impassible. The God of the Old Testament is a deeply passionate God. And I think we do well to think that God does passionately care about us and his world. And by the way, his celestial family. I've been reading some Dr. Michael Heisner. There's some really good stuff there. He is not emotionless. He's not the great Mr. Spock in the sky. So is God impassible? If by impassible you mean the Westminster Confession of Faith impassible, unaffected by emotion. In other words, again, Mr. Spock in the sky. No, he's anything but that. He's not sinful. See, our emotions lead us to assert our own will without regard to the divine will and without regard to God's plan or person, and it ends up being a sinful caricature of what God has. So God is not impassible. Look at the passage. It does not allow for that. But, he made fun of us being sinful. Okay. Goy for Jesus made a comment here. I hope he'll post. It would be good to have a definition of divine aseity. But aseity is something that William Lane Craig has spent a lot of time with. And he's saying, and Goy for Jesus was just pointing out impassibility. Unable to suffer, God doesn't experience pleasure or pain. Again, not at all. God's self-existence is aseity. So I don't necessarily see it as a consequence of aseity per se. I think it's more a matter of we as image bearers experience a limited sinful reflection that would be non-sinful. And he says not dependent on others. And I think God had love within the Trinity. So the feeling of emotion would not be something that would make him dependent on other people. So interesting discussions. Would a personal God require emotion? In a philosophical sense, a personal God would only have to be able to relate to us as persons. Could Spock relate as a person to Captain Kirk? Yes, he could. So I'm not sure that a personal God would have to be a God who experienced emotions, but I think it is logical that a personal God would experience emotions. In other words, it leads to the inference that God is likely an emotional God, but it does not logically force the issue. So some good conversations. I'm going to pull Lindsay's comment for right now, simply so that we can move on. But I like this. This is a great conversation. Oops. Okay. I want you to look at the word pleading in just a moment, because you could get the idea that Moses was just sort of suggesting to God. I mean, this is the way a singer might paint it. Yeah. Moses was just helping the people out a little bit, First of all, the hysterical thing is that I deliberately picked this passage because it's Moses. The Jewish people, the Orthodox Jewish people, they don't just say Moses. They say Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. He's the one who gave us the instruction about God, okay? His example of averting God's wrath from the children of Israel by being a mediator between God and Israel is the quintessential example, okay? For the detractors to say Judaism doesn't need a middleman, while you have a passage like this, I would say this is the quintessential proof from Torah that a middleman is needed. Unless you think that Jewish people or Jewish polemicists think Jewish people are so much more obedient than they ever used to be, that's just silliness. And you just need to ask them why in the world they're celebrating the Day of Atonement when they obviously don't need any. I mean, that's just kind of silly. Is Moses just, I mean, is he really pouring himself out here? I mean, is this really Moses beseeching God? Are we getting a little King James or a little bit too much here? Kind of overstating what Moses did. He just kind of like, it's kind of okay, and these are your people and they'll sort of straighten out. Or is he really beseeching God? Now, we have passages that Moses even says, blot me out of, in the same section, blot me out of the book of life. But I want to let you know that the word beseech, which is used, is intensive. It's seeking the favor of God. That's why I picked that Arwen clip. Moses is literally saying, whatever relationship I have with you, let that be forfeit and let it pass on to these people. That's literally what's going on here with the Hebrew word. And so I stuck that Hebrew word up. It comes from a root, halal, but it's a form of that word. And Moses is seriously beseeching. This is like real stuff. Going for Jesus is just pointing out asiety. I'm going to double back to that, Jeff. Because we'll go back to asiety. It's a little bit off target. Because you could conceivably have a being who was emotionless. Again, you have Spock. Spock does not have self-existence or, has the property of existing just by himself, but Spock is incredibly emotionless. So I'm going to double back to that just so that we can, kind of keep things a little going before we double back to that. One of the biggest things that is ignored by these Jewish polemicists, of course, is the sacrificial system, which is totally ignored. But by the way, and Jeff, aka a Goy for Jesus, can testify to this. There's whole sections of the Talmud that deal with the sacrificial system. Okay, the priesthood demonstrates God's relationship with Israel was always mediated with Israel, and even the individual was always mediated. In other words, not only were there intermediaries between God and man, but God actually set it up so. No apologies needed for good questions ever. So I won't post the comment up there. I will not ignore anyone's questions. So I'm thrilled, Lindsay, that you're asking them. I sometimes have to double back, just so that we can follow the argument through and then double back to the corollaries that may end up occurring because of an argument or a discussion about an argument. So don't ever be sorry. Be engaged. I love it. I don't get this type of engagement in some other venues of teaching. So, and I'm going to go back. Goy for Jesus asked a question of whether the concern was changing or having emotions. Okay. And we'll have a little discussion about that. But I do want to point out that the whole Jewish sacrificial system is based on the idea of mediation. Yes. Dead on. And I think theophanies are also a demonstration of mediation. And that's why I'm thinking about reserving that topic for next week, because seeing the fact that God always mediates his presence through theophanies, and that those theophanies themselves are treated as intermediaries, I think adds just another layer to this whole discussion. But just to go ahead and I'm throwing the Hebrew out there, and some of you are getting into the Hebrew, so it's good, like reading practice. Okay, Vinatan oto likochen. Okay, clearly it's give it to the priest. Natan is to give, as in gift, to place, or even in some senses to appoint. In this particular case, the word Natan is to give it to the priest. That's the oto, and le kohen is there. And so this phrase occurs in Leviticus 5:16, and it occurs other times. I also highlighted something very important that you need to see here. I didn't put the Hebrew. Okay. Well, actually, I did. Yeah. V'cha kohen yikefar, because there's no pointing dot there. Okay. To the priest to make atonement. Now, if you have no mediation at all, why is the priest making atonement? See, the sacrificial system teaches very clearly that mediatorship between God and man must happen, because atonement is made through an intermediary or through a mediator. So this is not a legitimate claim. And the interesting thing is, this isn't just used once. I mean, like, wow, the idea of atonement and high priest only occurs once, you know. This particular form of the word that we translate as atonement is in a positive sense. Now, it's used negatively, cannot make atonement or shall not make atonement. And I remove those negative senses and focused on the positive ones. Is used in the form in a positive sense. It either refers to the means of atonement, like this lamb will be the means of atonement, will make atonement, or it indicates the mediator making atonement for the individual. So when this particular verb is used, it either refers to the object being sacrificed, thus the blood, the means or the medium of atonement, or to the one making atonement. And a big shout out. Thank you so much. Elizabeth is sharing that. And so I'm going to put that up there. I really appreciate it. And so even the usage of the verb here definitely is tied to a mediation that is necessary. How you can make the claim is not make any sense. How does this relate to us? Well, it relates to us in terms of Jesus as our high priest. Now, this is the whole basis of Hebrews. I didn't even go through Hebrews, but there are whole chapters on this in Hebrews. And the idea to say to your Jewish friend is, look, you had a whole high priesthood and sacrificial system by which atonement was made through a mediator, being the high priest. That's all we are saying, is that Jesus is the ultimate mediator. He's the ultimate high priest. So polemicist, whether you be Shmuley or Tovia, your claim does not fit with the clear language of the book of Leviticus and the Torah. It does not fit with the pictures of the high priest receiving an offering and making atonement for an individual, because he's acting as a mediator. He's receiving the offering for God, and he's offering it to God. So it doesn't fit with any of that. It does not fit with the fact that you don't consider the Hasidics an abhorrent sect, even though the Rebbe has intermediary type roles between God and man. You're ignoring a whole part of Jewish thought, and you're ignoring incredibly the Torah, but you're ignoring the Tanakh too. Let me tell you why. Let's look at some examples of individuals taking the advice of our polemicist. Anybody can just go to God any way he wants to. Well, we have an incident like that where a king decided to do that. Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26, 16 through 19 decides he's just going to go and talk to God and brush into the temple. She's pointing out the use of will atone. I don't know if the vowel pointings indicate a pial, but it's the pial form. And then it will atone, or he will atone, because we have a third person here. So, little Hebrew from our sister there, appreciated. I love this. Uzziah decides anybody can just go in and talk to God and violate sacred space here. I appreciated the discussion of sacred space in terms of the celestial realm and God's celestial family and wanting to redeem us and the divine council and reuniting the celestial and earthly family. It was some good stuff here because Jews had sacred space. And when he does this, he gets leprosy. So taking the advice of these polemicists gives King Uzziah leprosy, which he eventually dies from. Really useful advice, right? Okay. Uzziah is a clear illustration that you just don't waltz into God's presence any which way you want, without the proper things being dealt with. Okay, so, Leah says, now, wait a minute. Dr. Jeff, you're saying that God can't, people can't just pray to God? God doesn't want to hear from people? I do want to bring some balance to this. I don't walk around telling unbelievers never address God. I mean, that'd be kind of silly. How do you accept Jesus? Well, you go to God. Well, no, really, you can't. No, I want to make a distinction that's not being made by these polemicists. They're missing the point. First of all, do I think that God hears the prayers of the unsaved? Well, in the sense of being willing to answer those prayers that are within his will, yeah. Yeah, I have answered prayer in my life before I was saved. In fact, the incident that I feel was the very root of my calling, which I have not, I don't think, shared with you. Well, I probably did when my testimony, was God ultimately answering the prayer of a kid in front of a tree in a place in a suburb of Chicago called Des Plaines. Okay. There were things God did to kind of show he was around before I was saved. But the distinction is this, and this is the distinction they're ignoring. There's a difference between being able to address God and being able to be in God's presence. Now, that's an incredibly Jewish and important difference. See, Rabbi Singer, you're saying anyone can pray to God. Yes, but can anyone have covenant relationship with and live within his presence? You see, Rabbi Singer, Judaism never taught, at least not biblical Judaism, that anybody had the right to demand covenant with God or enter God's presence. So can God hear the prayers of the unsaved? Well, I think they are. Yeah, God can answer any prayer that's according to his will. What's God going to not do? Answer a prayer according to his will because it happened to come out of the mouth of an unsaved person? That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem biblical to me. But there's no covenant obligation there. There's no entering God's presence there. See, God just doesn't want to occasionally hear from people. The idea is relationship and being able to live in his presence. And you've totally ignored that little distinction. And Israel had that distinction. Okay? To enter into the tabernacle area, to have God dwelling in the midst of you, to live in his presence was an important thing. And that idea of the presence of God, notice what the Lubavitch said, to have connection, to have kesher. Okay? Everything needs to be connected to God. Everything needs to have kesher. Kesher is different than merely praying a prayer and having God to overhear it. And so you're missing the point. You are so sinful, and kesher is different than simply God being able to hear a prayer. Yes, Jesus is that great. I couldn't end this broadcast without being able to talk about who Jesus is. Not because you guys don't know, but clearly the polemicist doesn't understand who Jesus is. He says, Jesus is so wonderful, and then he's going to go on to say, but she's too wonderful. So then Mary comes in. Well, Mary biblically never came in. Okay. And Jeff can comment well on Mariology here. But that's not the point. Jesus is that great, and Hebrews is written to a Jewish audience. I want to say that. Okay, Jewish believers like me in the Second Temple period, and I believe prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, are exactly who is being written to. So let's put this back in its historic context. Stick with me. I know you might want to drop off, but we're within our hour. Let me just kind of boast in the Lord a little bit here, looking at Hebrews, a real Jewish thing. This is like what to say to a polemicist. Hey, God at various times in various manners spoke and passed to our fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to our people by the prophets. But in these last days, he speaks to us through his son, whom he has appointed heir of all things. And through him also he made the world. Boy, is that going to be offensive. But we're going to have to deal with that because Jesus couldn't be the mediator if he wasn't God. The same way as Moses. He couldn't be the perfect mediator. Look what's said. He is the radiance of his glory. That's the Shekinah. And the expressed image of his person, upholding all things by the word of his power, when he himself had purged our sins, intermediating for us, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. Look at what's being said here. Jesus is the living, walking Shekinah glory of God. And just as, don't let me steal too much thunder from next week, possibly, just as Jesus is the ultimate theophany, the theophanies mediated between God and man in the sense that God mediated his presence through those theophanies. Now, let me try and put that in some simple verbiage. Every time God appeared as a theophany, there was mediation between man and God. Through that theophany, Jesus is the embodiment of the ultimate theophany. He is the embodiment of the succession of theophanies that God set up ahead of time, and therefore he is the ultimate mediator. If God did not need a mediator between man and God, he could appear just as God, and man could dwell just in his presence. But the fact that God mediated his presence through theophanies indicates that mediation was necessary, and that's why the Hasidics had the Memra. That's why they have the Tosafot, the Sfirot. They have the Sfirot because they don't believe man and God could do that. So let's go back to some of these questions. I did not going to let these go. I just absolutely love it. First of all, I put that up there. Slam, you're dead on. And I'm going to go back to some of these things about asiaity because that's an interesting argument. Now, asiaity is being defined. Okay. God is dependent on no one else. So he's not creaturely. See, a creature is always dependent. That's really the sinfulness of our independence before God, is that a creature is always dependent. Now, I'm going to switch this over to where it's just me. A creature is always dependent. And so we do not have asiaity. Jesus has asiaity, being God in the flesh. I'm going to go back up to Jeff. Were theologians concerned? So he's asking about what theologians were concerned about. God changing versus having emotions. So he's asking whether the concern was God's immutability. Now, immutability is the property of God in which he does not change in his essence at all. So when we say God is immutable, we mean that his properties or characteristics do not alter. He is always holy. He is always righteous. He is always loving. And that's what we mean by immutability. And so what Jeff is asking is, what was the concern of the theologians? Were they concerned that God couldn't change or he couldn't have emotions? So he's asking whether the theologians' chief concern was that emotions would change God in some way. And so if God was feeling something else, he would indeed be different than if he wasn't feeling it. So in order to guard immutability, they put impassibility in. It very well might have been the case, but do understand that the early theologians were influenced by Plato, and some of the Greek philosophers regarded emotion, particularly the Stoics, not as a good thing. And so they may well have been concerned about immutability, but immutability does not require impassibility. By the way, I may save that for an Apollo-bite. Immutability does not require impassibility because God does not change in his essence. And so that's what we're talking about with immutability. I can experience happiness and sadness, but I am still Jeff. And so if that was indeed the concern of the theologians, which I think there is evidence to support, they still made a leap in logic that they did not need to make. And they did not go back to their Old Testament narrative in which God is pictured very passionately. And that was a mistake. So that's kind of my Jeff Cran take on that. I love the square the circle comment. If God is outside of time, that may square the circle. I may need a little bit more of a logical foundation for what you're trying to convey. What we see is a God who is distinctly transcendent, but immanent enough to be concerned about the actions of people, to give room for those actions, and to use those actions in his plan. The problem with the impassibility is not only doesn't it square with Scripture, but it really kind of wrecks immanence. You know, how can I pray to a God who has no idea or is incapable of comprehending? And what would that have done to the interface with Jesus being both man and God? Then we would have to say that Jesus's nature experienced sadness, his human nature, but his divine nature never did. And that would be a violation, if I said that, of the creed, the Chalcedon Creed, which the church has basically held to, that Jesus had two natures, but those two natures are such that you wouldn't have one nature experiencing something that the other nature couldn't. They're distinct, yet they're integrated in such a way. It's a very hard language to understand. I remember going through the Creed of Chalcedon, but that's kind of where we're at. So in the end of the day, Jewish thought does allow for intercession and mediation. The sacrificial system clearly in Torah indicates there was intercession there between God and man and needed to be. And there were intermediation between God and man and needed to be. And we haven't even touched the theophanies yet. The polemicists against Judaism are ignoring the sacrificial system. They're ignoring the intercession of Moses. They're ignoring even strains of thought within Judaism. And they're oversimplifying it in order to create a false dichotomy, as well as an unscriptural position. So if your Jewish friend says, we don't need a middleman, you say to them, well, that's terribly interesting. You had a tabernacle and a temple, and you had high priests in between. This was your religion in Torah. Please explain to me how you can claim to be a Torah Jew or practice the Judaism that was handed down, when you don't believe in mediation and the sacrificial system taught mediation and demanded it. Beyond that, how do you explain people visiting Rabbi Schneerson and praying to him in Brooklyn if there's no mediation? So you need a little bit more information. Okay, Ben West jumped in, and I'm so glad to see Ben here. Let me jump in there. Is God outside of time without the universe and in time since? Oh, wow. Ooh, now I'm almost like going to have to go back to California, not just to walk down the aisle, but to spend serious time with J.P. Moreland here. Wow. Let me take a stab here. Because of the relationship between transcendence and immanence, what Ben is asking is, since God is transcendent, he's outside of time. But if he enters into his creation, then he is in time. Yes, the word since is being used as a linguistic connector. Rather than saying there are two sets of conditions related to immanence and transcendence, and Ben is asking which condition prevails. Both conditions are equally true. And Slam put up the Chalcedon Creed here just to help us out. Two natures without confusion, without change, without division, and without separation. And I remember having to memorize that in seminary, but I haven't had to use it over coffee for a little while. That was because of some of the Gnosticism that viewed Jesus not as having a real divine nature. Back to Ben's question, is God outside of time within the universe? The fact that God is outside of time means he's aware of all things simultaneously without there needing to be a progression the way there is. But can God experience time? Well, now we're back to, did God experience time in the person of Jesus? Well, he was fully divine. So I would say in that sense, God indeed plans. Plan requires succession. God is not bound by time. And C.S. Lewis would say he exists in the eternal now, but that does not mean he cannot comprehend time or possibly experience time if he so chooses to do so, which in the person of Jesus, who grew in wisdom and knowledge, both with man and God, I would assume he did. And he gave the Israelites certain times of year and certain times for sacrifices and was present during that. So I think God's transcendence does not infer that he cannot relate to time, but rather he is not bound by time. And his knowledge is not bound by time. I like the line that C.S. Lewis uses where Aslan says, I call all time soon. Whoa. Okay, that's a question for Ben. Did God have experiences before creation? Ben, I'll just ask you to think about the Trinity for a few minutes and ask yourself whether the members of the Trinity shared relationship at all. And that's the sort of question you're into. Because we believe in a Trinitarian God, we believe that love is not something that God needed us around to do, but that he experienced love within the Godhead prior to creation. We talk about this two ways. We talk about what's called the ontological Trinity, and we talk about what's called the economic Trinity. In the ontological Trinity, there's relationship. So the question is, can you have relationship without experiences? That's a really good question. Ben West said no. Ben, the only thing I'll say to you is I'd like to understand how you have relationship without experiences per se, because I know the Trinity shared love and that God foreknew us before the foundation of the world, which would be creation, and that Jesus had a hand in designing our lives to draw ourselves to him before creation. That's Ephesians chapter 1. So I don't know how the heavenly God had planned without having experiences. So that's something to consider over coffee, or maybe tonight if you want to give yourself insomnia. But I'd love to hear how you work that all out. I tend to think of relationship as having some sort of sense of experience to it. But that could just be my limited finiteness. Goy for Jesus says the word before doesn't apply. It doesn't temporally apply. When I was in seminary, we talked about supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism. By the way, I think that's really bad theology to try and figure out which thought God had first. But what I would say is that the word before can be used in a logical sense, like premise A is before premise B. So I'm using it under the mode of logic. So I'm using before modally to refer to logical order as opposed to temporal order. So there's probably a sense in which modally before can refer to logical sequence, not necessarily temporal sequence. That's the sort of thing William Lane Craig would write an entire book on. So, and I'm not into doing that as a book. Last point out, the Haggadah you're going to see tomorrow, I am working on setting up so that it can be a perk for Patreon or offered possibly on Amazon. So I've got a few writing projects that I'd like to revise and make available to people. And I'm thinking about how best to do that. Okay. Wow. So I think that's about where we are for tonight. Thank you for the exact quoting of the Creed of Chalcedon. And I think and we had some side conversations that those who watch will be really interested in. Thank you, Jesse. I always appreciate the encouragement. And more than one of you is encouraged. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the website being up. Let me go to Banner real quick. I do want to let you know we've revamped our website. So just to go ahead and let you know, you can go to www.zionsbanner.org. We're working on that website, making it better. I'm going to put that up there. Whoops, sorry, let me fix that. That's not right. It's zionsbanner.org. You need the ORG to get there. There you go. It doesn't want to let me do this. All righty. Okay. That's because this is thinking it's wrong, and I don't care. So that's Grammarly. Okay. Not going to share readily. There we go. That's the website. Go there, get more info. We're improving it constantly. Tomorrow night, prayers for a 2-camera special edition. Messiah in the Passover Reflections using the Haggadah that I developed. Oh, I think 10 or 15 years ago. I developed over 15 years of doing this. And then we'll move on from there. I will be posting about next week, but I think we may look at the theophanies and intercession and whether the theophanies ever received worship. Might be a real good place to go. And that puts us up for tonight. You guys are great. So I'm going to say good night. I will try to get a, I'll jumble back to the station. But Erev Tov, Arizona time. Probably would be something else for Australia. So there we go. So if it's not Erev Tov by you, good evening. For the East Coast, it would be Lila Tov, good night. For Australia, well, that's another thing. So, yeah. All right. From Arizona.